Welcome to the Explainer. So today we're looking at what seems like a really simple story, but it actually reveals some surprisingly profound truths about management, decision-making, and unintended consequences. On the surface, our source text is literally just a quick conversation between a mother and her 6-year-old son about their apartment building's garden. But as we unpack the layers of this story, we'll see exactly how these seemingly small, everyday decisions act as a perfect microcosm for widespread systemic failures. I'm absolutely thrilled to walk you through this because it's just a brilliant breakdown of how things go completely sideways when leadership lacks foresight. Okay, let's dive into this. We're starting right where our story begins. A 6-year-old boy named Ajay looks out at his apartment's garden and notices something kind of strange. The gardeners are out there actively ripping out perfectly good living flowers. It's such a fantastic opening question from a child's perspective, right? Why destroy something that's already thriving? His Mama, doesn't really have the answer, so she encourages him to just go down and ask the gardeners directly. And with that innocent little question, our central mystery is set into motion. Section 1. The Garden Mystery, a microcosm of decision-making. So Ajay goes down to the garden, chats with the workers, observes them for a bit, and comes back upstairs with an answer that totally shifts this entire conversation. He reveals this shocking piece of information. These flowers can cause asthma. Wow! Suddenly, this isn't just some harmless garden issue. It's a literal public health hazard right in their residential complex. Mama immediately asks the most logical follow-up question. If they cause asthma, why on earth were they planted in the first place? And this leads us to the first major leadership failure in our story. Section 2. The Trap of Cheap Choices, when cost outweighs competence. Here we're introduced to the logic of the original person who was put in charge of horticulture for the building. It reveals a deeply flawed, but honestly incredibly common decision-making process. According to Ajay's findings, the manager responsible for the garden just needed to plant something. Instead of, actually researching what would be safe and appropriate for a residential space, they optimized for 3 things: speed, low maintenance, and cheapness. They wanted fast-growing plants that cost basically nothing. So, step 1, need plants. Step 2, pick the cheapest, fastest option. Step 3, accidentally create a massive asthma hazard for the residents. They focused entirely on the budget and the timeline, completely ignoring the actual context of what they were doing. Mama's reaction to this is wonderfully cynical, but incredibly accurate. She states, "This is what happens if someone with no subject knowledge is made in charge of a department." Man, she hits the nail on the head. The manager lacked even basic competence in horticulture. And she points out the really tragic, wasteful result of this incompetence. Living plants, which are just doing exactly what they're supposed to do, unnecessarily have to be cut down and destroyed simply because a manager didn't do their homework. Section 3. The Idealistic Overcorrection, the Pendulum Swings. Now, Ajay, being a really compassionate 6-year-old, pushes back a little against his mom's harsh critique. He says, one can make mistakes, and reminds her that she often says the underlying intent is what's truly essential. But Mama draws this brilliant, hard line between personal choices and leadership. She completely agrees that intent matters when we're discussing our personal lives, but, and this is a massive but, when a person's decisions are going to impact others, having good intent simply isn't enough. Competence becomes absolutely non-negotiable. If a manager isn't competent, Mama argues, they need to either learn the subject or hand the reins over to someone else who actually knows more. You just can't use good intentions as a shield when your lack of knowledge is actively harming the people you're supposed to be serving. And that brings us to the replacement strategy. Mama asks what they're planting now. Ahaji explains the new horticulture person's grand vision. This new manager is absolutely determined to save the bees, noting that they're vital to the survival of mankind. To pull this off, they're planting nectar-rich flowers, specifically chosen to attract bees and hummingbirds. I mean, it sounds beautiful, right? It sounds like the ultimate good intent. Section 4. The Cycle of Short-Sightedness, repeating the same mistakes. But here's where practical reality crashes headfirst into grand idealism. The gardeners, the folks actually doing the work on the ground, already see the massive flaw in this new plan. And this brilliantly illustrates the core lesson of our source text. We have 2 managers, and both are making terrible decisions for completely different reasons. Manager 1 focused purely on cheap and fast logistics, which gave us an asthma hazard. Manager 2 swings the pendulum entirely in the other direction, focusing purely on a global idealistic goal, saving mankind by saving the bees. But as the gardeners pointed out to a J, planting a mess of bee attractant in a residential apartment complex means the bees will come, they'll build hives on the roots, and the residents are inevitably going to get stung. Manager 2 has completely ignored the immediate local context of their decision, exactly like Manager 1 did. This builds into an absurd, totally doomed life cycle for this poor garden. Phase 1, they plant the cheap flowers. Phase 2, they rip them out because of asthma. Phase 3, the new manager plants nectar flowers. Phase 4, well, it's completely predictable. As Mama foresees, this short-sightedness guarantees a never-ending cycle of planting and destroying. Mama delivers the final, really poignant prediction of the story, and after a few cases of bee stings, they will take those off too. It perfectly sums up the absolute futility of the second manager's overcorrection. The plants are literally doomed before they even take root, all because the decision-maker prioritized an abstract ideal over practical, localized competence. So, what should you take away from this whole thing? Well, our simple garden story perfectly maps out 3 major systemic flaws in decision-making. First, intent does not equal competence. You can want to save the budget, or you can want to save the bees, but if you don't understand the environment you're operating in, you're going to fail. Second, when leadership decisions impact others, you totally forfeit the right to use "I meant well" as an excuse. And third, short-sightedness, whether it's driven by penny pinching or blind idealism, guarantees cyclical waste. Resources, time, and in this case, living plants, are just thrown away over and over again. It's a fascinating framework to view the world through, isn't it? And this brings us to a final thought for you to ponder today. Look around at the policies, the management structures, or the systems in your own life or workplace. Where do you see this kind of short-sighted horticulture? Where are people endlessly planting and ripping out the same metaphorical flowers because the people in charge lacked the subject knowledge to get it right the first time? Think about that, and definitely keep an eye out for those unintended consequences. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.